September 14th, 1945. Camp Mullen, Texas. Afternoon light slanted through dust-caked windows of the mess hall, casting amber bars across worn floorboards. Sergeant Bill Hayworth stood frozen in the doorway, hat gripped in calloused fingers. A Japanese woman prisoner of war, number 4827, knelt beside a makeshift charcoal stove, her hands moving with the kind of grace that suggested muscle memory older than the conflict itself. The aroma drifting through that Texas prison kitchen wasn't just food. It was memory made tangible, culture compressed into rice and salt. Drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, whether you're in Dallas or Dublin, Manila or Montreal. You're part of a community that believes the most powerful stories from history aren't always the ones written in blood, but sometimes in salt and seaweed and the quiet dignity of human hands that refuse to forget who they are. Hayworth stepped closer, his boots creaking protest against the floorboards. Other guards had noticed, too. Cowboys from ranches near Brownsville and Laredo, young men who'd never left Texas until Uncle Sam's telegram arrived. They gathered near the kitchen entrance without speaking, without planning it, drawn by something they couldn't name. The woman didn't look up. She continued her work with a focus that seemed to erase the barbed wire, the guard towers, the 3 years of captivity itself. And in that crystalline moment, watching her hands shape rice with the same devotion his grandmother shaped Sunday biscuits, Hayworth understood something the newsreels never showed, something that made his throat tighten. The enemy was human. Terrifyingly, undeniably, beautifully human. The war had ended 23 days earlier. Hirohito's voice had crackled over radios across the Pacific, announcing surrender in language so formal many Japanese citizens couldn't understand it. But in the American Southwest, the machinery of imprisonment ground on. Camp Mullen sprawled across 200 acres of scrubland, originally constructed to house Italian prisoners captured in North Africa. Germans came later, U-boat crews, Africa Corps veterans, men who'd surrendered in Tunisia and Sicily. The Japanese section occupied the eastern corner, separated by additional fencing, additional scrutiny, additional fear. 47 people total. 18 women, 12 children, 17 men deemed too dangerous for standard internment camps. They weren't soldiers, they were families. Executive Order 9066 had seen to that. Signed by Roosevelt in February 1942, it authorized the removal of over 120,000 Japanese Americans from the West Coast. Most went to internment camps scattered across California, Arizona, Wyoming, places with names like Manzanar and Tule Lake that would haunt American conscience for generations. But suspected security risks, those with family connections to Japan or Japanese cultural organizations, faced harsher treatment. They went to places like Mullen, where German U-boat commanders and Japanese housewives found themselves imprisoned under the same Texas sun. Enemy aliens in a war neither had wanted. Yuki Tanaka was 32 years old. Before Pearl Harbor, she'd operated a small restaurant in San Francisco's Nihonmachi district, serving rice bowls and miso soup to dock workers and office clerks. Her husband worked the waterfront. Her 2 children attended Jefferson Elementary, where they pledged allegiance to the flag each morning and learned to spell words like liberty and justice. Then came December 7th, 1941. Within months, 120,000 lives shattered like dropped porcelain. Yuki's father had returned to Osaka, before the war to care for her dying mother. That single fact, one parent in Japan, sealed her fate. In March 1943, she arrived at Camp Mullen with her children and 30 other people whose only crime was ancestry. The camp commander, Colonel James Mackay, was a West Point graduate who'd lost his left leg at Kasserine Pass in Tunisia. He walked with a prosthetic that clicked against floorboards, announcing his approach like a metronome of authority. Mackay believed in order, routine, discipline, not from cruelty, but from conviction that structure prevented chaos. Wake at 6. Roll call at 6:30. Breakfast in the main mess, powdered eggs and weak coffee that tasted like regret. Work assignments followed. Men repaired roads or picked cotton on nearby farms under guard. Women worked laundry, mending, kitchen duty. Children attended makeshift school and converted barracks, learning American history from teachers who wouldn't meet their parents' eyes. Evening roll call at 6, lights out at 9, day after day, month after month. While the world burned, Camp Mullen existed in a strange temporal bubble, neither peace nor active war, just the gray space of captivity, where time moved like cold honey. Yuki had been assigned kitchen duty early on. Mackay's philosophy was simple. Idle hands bred trouble. Keep prisoners busy, keep them tired, keep them from thinking too hard about the injustice of their situation. Yuki proved herself capable and invisible in the way women learned to be when visibility meant danger. She scrubbed pots until they gleamed. She peeled potatoes without complaint. She never spoke unless spoken to, never met eyes unless necessary. The other kitchen workers, mostly German POWs, and a few Italian holdovers, gave her wide berth. The Germans had fought honorably, everyone knew that. The Japanese were different, fanatics, savages. That's what the newsreels showed. That's what everyone believed. But Sergeant Hayworth had noticed things. Small things. The way Yuki arranged vegetables before chopping them, sorted by color and size with geometric precision. The way she wiped surfaces twice, 3 times until no trace of grime remained. The way she bowed slightly when receiving instructions, a gesture of respect so deeply ingrained it survived transplantation to this dusty Texas prison. It reminded him of his grandmother, a stern Baptist woman who treated cooking like prayer, who believed the Lord could see your heart through the cleanliness of your kitchen. There was something universal in that devotion, something that crossed language and war and hate, something uncomfortably human. August 15th, 1945, brought chaos. News of Japan's surrender crackled through camp radios, tinny voices announcing the unthinkable. Guards celebrated. German prisoners watched with complex emotions, their own defeat now a year old, their futures uncertain. Italian POWs, already reclassified as co-operators who worked without guard in nearby towns, shrugged philosophically. They'd seen this coming since D-Day. But in the Japanese section, silence fell like snow. Men sat on barracks steps, faces unreadable as stone. Women gathered children close, hands stroking hair, lips moving in wordless comfort. The war was over, but what did that mean? Where would they go? San Francisco had been home, but was it still? The exclusion orders remained in effect. Legal challenges wound through courts at the speed of bureaucracy. Everything remained uncertain, suspended. 3 days later, Colonel Mackay called a special assembly. Over 2,000 prisoners filled the Central Yard Germans in faded Africa Corps uniforms. Italians in mismatched civilian clothes, a Japanese group, clustered together like a small island in a European sea. McKay stood on a wooden platform, uniform crisp despite the heat, prosthetic leg aching in the Texas summer, but his posture parade ground straight. His voice carried across the silent assembly with the clarity of a man accustomed to being obeyed. The war is finished. Processing for repatriation will begin immediately. For Germans and Italians, the path was clear. Ships were already being allocated. Home beckoned, even if home was rubble and occupation. But for Japanese internees, the future remained murky. Many had been American citizens before Executive Order 9066 stripped away everything but ancestry. Could they return to the West Coast? Would they? Should they? Then McKay said something unexpected, something that would ripple through that September afternoon and change everything. Until transport arrangements are finalized, this camp remains your home. We will treat it as such. I'm authorizing expanded privileges, more recreation time, letter writing without censorship, and 1 evening per month. Each group may prepare a traditional meal for their section. Consider it a gesture of peace, a small recognition that the war is truly over. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Germans perked up, already planning Sauerbraten and Spitzel. Italians grinned, dreaming of proper pasta with sauce that didn't come from a can. But in the Japanese section, Yuki Tanaka felt something she hadn't felt in 37 months. Not hope was too large, too dangerous. Something smaller. The possibility of making food that tasted like home, that carried memory in every grain of rice. The chance to cook something that mattered. She found Sergeant Hayworth 2 days later near the supply shed, where he was checking inventory on clipboards that never matched reality. She waited at a respectful distance until he noticed her, then explained her request in careful English, accent soft but clear. She wanted to prepare onigiri for her section's meal. Rice balls wrapped in nori seaweed, filled with pickled plum or salted salmon. Simple food, comfort food. The kind of meal Japanese mothers made for children's lunches, for travelers, for anyone who needed sustenance wrapped in care. Hayworth listened. He'd been expecting requests for soy sauce or elaborate ingredients impossible to source in South Texas. But rice and seaweed, the camp had mountains of rice. It was cheap, filling. The foundation of prison kitchens everywhere. Seaweed would be harder. There wasn't a Japanese grocery within 300 miles. But he'd seen dried kelp in a general store in McAllen, imported from California for health food enthusiasts who believed it cured everything from gout to melancholy. He made the drive into town that afternoon. McAllen dozed in the September heat, storefronts shimmering in the glare, streets empty except for dogs sleeping in shade. The general store on Madison Street was run by an elderly couple who'd watched the town grow from railroad stop to cotton hub. They eyed his uniform, asked if he needed supplies for the camp. When he explained about the seaweed, the old woman nodded without surprise, got some in back. Japanese stuff came in before the war. Nobody's bought it since. You can have it for cost. He left with a box of dried nori sheets, vacuum-sealed and surprisingly well-preserved, and a small jar of umeboshi, pickled plums from a dusty shelf where it had sat forgotten for 4 years. The label was in Japanese, faded but legible. He couldn't read it. But Yuki would. When he delivered the supplies, her composure cracked. Just for a moment, her eyes widened. Her hand went to her mouth. Then she bowed deeply, lower than before, low enough that Hayworth felt uncomfortable, embarrassed by gratitude for something as simple as groceries. But he was beginning to understand that for Yuki, for all the Japanese internees, these parcels of seaweed and preserved plum represented something larger than food. They were proof that home still existed, even if only in flavor and memory. September 14th dawned clear and hot. Yuki woke before the rising bell, unable to sleep. She'd been planning the meal for days, calculating portions, estimating cooking times with the precision of someone who'd run a restaurant, who understood that food was chemistry and timing and love in equal measure. The camp kitchen offered limited equipment, no rice cookers, no proper knives, no bamboo mats for shaping. She'd have to improvise. But improvisation was a skill war taught everyone. After morning roll call, she was excused from regular duties. Other Japanese women volunteered to help. Together they moved through the kitchen like a choreographed dance, movements synchronized by shared culture and shared loss. Rice soaked in large pots. Canned salmon precious hoarded was drained and flaked. The yumaboshi were carefully halved, each plum a burst of sour intensity that made mouths water with memory. German Poes working the morning kitchen shift watched with curiosity. They'd prepared their own traditional meal the week before, a feast of bratwurst and potato salad that had lifted spirits throughout their section. They understood what Yuki was attempting. Food was memory. Food was identity. Food was the thing that reminded you who you'd been before war stripped everything else away. One German, a former chef from Hamburg named Klaus, approached Yuki mid-morning. He'd been captured in Tunisia, spent 2 years in American custody, and had grown philosophical about captivity. He offered advice on managing the camp's temperamental stoves, showed her a trick for keeping rice from scorching. She nodded thanks. And for a moment, 2 former enemies collaborated over the simple problem of heating water. By noon, the rice was ready. Perfect grains, sticky enough to hold shape, but not mushy. Yuki wet her hands in a bowl of salted water, an old technique to prevent sticking her mother had taught her in San Francisco, in a kitchen that smelled of miso and memories and a future that no longer existed. She scooped a palmful of rice, pressed it gently into a triangle. The pressure had to be exact. Too hard and the rice became dense, lost its lightness, too soft and it fell apart. Her hands knew the balance without thinking. She made an indentation in the center, placed a fragment of yumaboshi, covered it with more rice. Her hands shaped and smoothed, creating a perfect triangular form. Then she wrapped it in nori, the seaweed crackling slightly as it settled around the warm rice. 1 onigiri complete. 46 more to go. Word spread through camp that something interesting was happening in the kitchen. Guards on afternoon rotation found excuses to patrol nearby. The aroma drifting from the windows was unlike anything Camp Mullen usually produced. Not the greasy scent of fried spam or the institutional blandness of boiled cabbage. This was different. Rice and salt and something briny and mysterious, something that smelled inexplicably like care. Sergeant Hayworth was the first to pause in the doorway. He'd been doing paperwork in the administration building, but the smell drew him out like a fish on a line. Others followed. Corporal Jim Dawson, a bronc rider from Del Rio with hands scarred from rope and horn. Private Eddie Martinez, whose family ran a cattle operation near the border, who spoke Spanish and English but had never heard Japanese, until the internees arrived. Lieutenant Frank Garrett, a school teacher from Austin who'd been drafted and assigned to camp administration because his feet were too flat for combat. They gathered loosely near the kitchen entrance, not blocking it, but not leaving either. Yuki and the other women were focused entirely on their work. Each onigiri was crafted individually. No assembly line. No shortcuts. The women talked softly in Japanese, voices musical and incomprehensible to the watching guards, but the care in their movements transcended language. This wasn't just cooking. This was preservation of self through ritual, identity maintained through the stubborn act of making food properly, even in a prison camp in Texas, even after everything had been taken. Hayworth watched Yuki's hands. They moved with the confidence of decades of practice. Scoop, press, fill, wrap, a rhythm as natural as breathing. He thought of his grandmother again, the way she'd knead bread dough every Saturday, the same motion repeated until it became meditation. There was something sacred in repetition done well, something that reminded you the world still contained beauty, even in places designed to strip it away. More prisoners noticed the gathering guards. Germans paused in afternoon recreation. Card games abandoned mid-hand. Italians looked up from bocce courts. Japanese internees watched from barrack windows. Everyone sensed something significant, though nobody could explain it. The air felt charged, like the moment before a summer storm breaks. At 1500 hours, Colonel McKay appeared, making his rounds. He saw the clustered guards and frowned, ready to disperse them. Then he caught the scent drifting from the kitchen and stopped. He had served in the Philippines, had Japanese friends in Manila who fed him at their tables. The aroma stirred memories of street vendors and a world before everything collapsed. He stepped inside, prosthetic leg thumping. Yuki bowed. McKay waved her on, almost gently. "Continue, please." He watched in silence, then left without dispersing the guards. Some things mattered more than regulation. Evening brought relief from heat. The internees gathered in a converted barracks. Yuki carried out 47 perfect onigiri on wooden trays. Each person received one. Children got more. Elders the softest rice. They observed a moment of silence, not religious but grateful. Then they ate. Salt and umeboshi burst across tongues used to bland food, eyes closed. Some wept. It was San Francisco and Los Angeles, family dinners and childhood lunches, memory made edible. Outside, Sergeant Hayworth and other guards lingered. They saw joy and sorrow mingled on faces usually empty. They witnessed culture surviving captivity. Private Martinez whispered that his abuela made tamales every Christmas. Corporal Dawson spoke of Sunday biscuits. Lieutenant Garrett admitted he once taught history, but never this truth, that the enemy eats and remembers like us. Inside, Yuki collected trays and saw the guards watching. Not captors now, but witnesses. Not forgiveness or reconciliation, but recognition. War had been done to all of them. McKay filed a routine report. It traveled desks in Washington. When Camp Mullen released internees in November 1945, processing was expedited. A small mercy. Yuki returned to San Francisco. Her restaurant was gone, her home lost. She worked, saved, and in 1948 opened a small onigiri shop. People tasted something they could not name. Hayworth returned to Texas, raised a family, and remembered a woman who taught him humanity without words. Camp Mullen closed. A marker went up, but not for Onagiri or the September afternoon when guards became people. The war ended for them with rice shaped by caring hands, one onagiri at a time. The lie that made war possible cracked, and humanity endured. It was not victory, only quiet proof that dignity survives hatred. Memory survives loss, and kindness survives history itself, too.